capacity, and by that stage had already forced a temporary halt to operations. So today's strike really acts as a nail in the coffin for this key fuel supplier to the capital. And also to mention, as for Russian air defenses, most commentators are asking, where is Russia's fearsome and impenetrable protective umbrella? Well, as the daily stats dictate, they're thinning out one UAV strike at a time. So this is Moscow's mighty ring of air defense in all its glory, as the capital is getting another first-hand taste of the systemic ruin its leadership has exported. What a dark day for Moscow and its leadership, figuratively and, as we just saw, literally. So the event shows itself as a stark reversal of fortunes for Putin, the man who promised to take Kyiv in 3 days, who is now forced to bolt short-range air defense systems onto the rooftops of Moscow residential and office buildings and place protective nets on prime industry sites in a desperate and evidently failing bid to protect his own backyard, but probably just as much designed to protect his own ego as best he can. And then zooming out to look at the macro picture, as that singular strike in Moscow is feeding into a nationwide logistical collapse because Ukraine's relentless months-long strike campaign against downstream oil targets, leading to severe gasoline shortages that have now spread like a virus across 53 different Russian regions. In fact, the sheer scale of the deficit has forced the Kremlin's major energy players, so Rosneft, Bashneft, and so on, into panic measures, completely banning the sale of fuel in jerry cans and capping passenger cars at just 30 litres, barely 8 gallons, per visit, and with aviation also taking an equally heavy hit, with massive flight cancellations reported across the country due to dry fuel tanks, leaving major hubs like the Sochi airport in total chaos and passengers stranded for days, as Ukrainian long-range aerial threats are now shooting well above 30% reduction in overall Russian refining capacity, dragging total gasoline production down to a devastating 16-year low. In fact, Russia is bleeding refined products so fast that Moscow is reportedly preparing the humiliating step of importing fuel by sea from Asia just to keep their domestic market on life support. Reason being, you can pump millions of barrels of crude out of the Siberian permafrost as much as you possibly can, but if you don't have the intact distillation columns to turn into diesel, automotive gasoline, jet fuel, and so on, then you're high and dry and fresh out of luck. And what was once known as the world's gas station, suddenly purchasing at market value from other gas stations. Then further on the Russian map, as more rear pain was to be felt, with Ukrainian strike drones hitting an oil depot in Gakovo of Rostov, where the petroleum tanks did the very unhelpful assist of helping the tanks catch on fire. Next up, and headed into the main map, starting in the north, where Russia's border crossing drones struck the Nova Pochta sorting terminal in Sumy, a target that is one of Ukraine's private shipping and courier companies. No injuries were reported among the staff, but the facility itself took a heavy beating. The regional military administration was quick to point out the obvious, that there isn't a shred of military utility here. Russia still sees fit to wastefully aim at these kinds of targets to this very day. And to drive that point home, look no further than the same Sumy region within the same 24-hour reporting period. Another Russian drone strike targeted the local equestrian sports school. So we're talking the militarily important target of horse stables. Then next up on the map and into the German direction for the way it's shaping up, where a sudden flood of Russian maps has painted a wildly pessimistic picture of this front line, but one that, as of now, simply doesn't map to reality, because recent Russian updates suggest Lerman is covered in large swaths of grey and red occupation, but the Ukrainian forces remain firmly in control of the city proper. As for what we've seen instead is isolated, albeit deep, infiltrations by Russian infantry exploiting the burnt-out forest canopy that rings the area, slipping through open fields where Ukrainian reconnaissance occasionally misses a small squad. But hey, then again, Russia never misses an opportunity to call a small reconnaissance and force unit a full sweeping capture of a landmark town. Then sweep in deeper into the occupied Luhansk region with what we could now start calling the systemic dismantling of Russia's rear echelon supply network, with, for instance, fresh examples of another logistics node going up in smoke, highlighting exactly how porous the air defense umbrella over this supposedly secure territory has actually become. Then to look further down the map on the same Eastern theatre, where we get a rare unfiltered dose of reality, courtesy of the Russian Z channels themselves, who are openly panicking over a sudden collapse in their defensive lines, as even their own military bloggers are now confirming that the AFU has overrun their positions in Slodka and Podapne, using that newly seized ground as a springboard to push hard towards Mern. The panic is entirely justified. Ukrainian units have also swept up nearby towns along the outer perimeter, meaning that the closer this advance gets to the main supply arteries, especially at this location, then the harder it becomes for the Russian command to simply throw cheap meat waves at the problem. And speaking of those evaporating supply lines, because down on the critical highway artery connecting Donetsk to Mariupol, Ukrainian drone operators might just be stepping up in running a 24/7 hardware recycling program, in a relentless campaign of interdiction against Russian convoys trying to make the run north, turning what is supposed to be a secure interior highway into a high-speed shooting gallery. And then, following that exact route, straight down to the coast, we arrive at occupied Mariupol, seen with the delivery of an undeniable head-on message to the occupation security forces as a transport bus loaded for the Rosgvardia personnel, which is the Kremlin's premier riot police and occupation enforcers, was blown completely off its wheels right in the middle of the Livoberzhny district. And this occasion is a noteworthy update, as it's the very first confirmed decisive strike against occupation transport inside the city's administrative borders. Then on the map, and speaking of those vulnerable convoys, footage released by the Ukrainian primary unit shows exactly what happens to them, as the unit has been relentlessly hunting Russian transport vehicles across the occupied territories, with even a heavy emphasis on operations inside of Crimea, which was impressively the case here. As seen, the primary target of choice remains the humble fuel tanker. Then to take a look around the map, some astonishing frontline tape emerged showing a Russian fiber optic kamikaze drone slamming directly into a Ukrainian Oshkosh MATV. It was a massive hit, completely blowing out the rear cargo section of the mine-resistant ambush protected vehicle, aka MRAP. But that is exactly what the Oshkosh is engineered to do: sacrifice the extremities to save the core. The heavily armored crew compartment held firm against the blast, and the infantrymen inside walked away with 2 minor concussions. The Oshkosh MRAP, Wisconsin tough. Now to a brief glance at the news, with the G7 who has just delivered a joint statement on Ukraine that conspicuously scrubs any mention of a ceasefire or a negotiated freeze. Instead, the focus was largely on scaling up lethality by means of accelerating the delivery of new air defense arrays, interceptors, and long-range capabilities to build on Kyiv's recent momentum. Statements also zeroed in on Russia's war economy, promising a tightened squeeze on the energy sector, if it wasn't already being squeezed tightly enough by Ukrainian kinetic sanctions. Then to a super quick funny to round out the video, as the Kremlin's PR apparatus managed to step on its own rake during Putin's visit to Russia's Kazan region, as Russian state broadcaster Vesti pushed out official footage of the bunker dweller wadding into a crowd of supposed locals, but only for sharp-eared viewers to catch a security guard explicitly referring to the attendees as extras on the hot mic. Now, it's arguably an open secret by now, even in Russia, that the dictator hasn't been within 50 feet of an unvetted citizen in years, relying on a traveling circus of carefully screened background actors. And even then, on this occasion, he still didn't dare venture too close. Either way, broadcasting the stage directions on national television is remarkably sloppy, even by Moscow's decaying standards. So that's it for today, guys. thanks again for watching. Once again, I'm starting to get a bit more regular. It feels like it's going back in a good direction now. So thanks again. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next